Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the February edition of the Lebanon Plan Commission. First order of business, we will, of course, call ourselves to order and call the roll.
Dan Bayshore. Denise Niblick.
Here.
Diane Scott is absent. Kevin Krulik. Here. Corey Coots.
Here.
Keith Campbell.
Here.
Heather Schaller.
Here.
And Lori Gross.
Here.
Thank you very much, Ben. Pulling all duties this evening, so I appreciate you. The only kind of administrative item that I have up here is the approval of the minutes. I believe we received all of those, so I would entertain a motion.
I'll motion to approve.
Got a motion to approve. Do we have a second?
Second.
Got a motion and a second. All those in favor, please signify with an aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. That motion does carry. We do have one item under old business that is being continued to the March meeting, so we'll move ourselves on to new business. And Ben, if you could give us a little insight on docket number 25-5.
All right. So maybe in case there is somebody in the audience tonight for that old business item, it is docket 25-1. It is the amendment to the Spring Creek PUD. So if anyone was here to learn about the Spring Creek PUD, that has been continued to the March 17th meeting. So I don't know if anybody is, but just want to make sure in case somebody was here and they could go home. So we will hear that at the March 17th meeting. The item on the agenda for this evening is Eli Lilly and Company, and it is a development plan request for the Lilly Medicine Foundry campus. And that project is located on a 200-acre piece of property. That's essentially the southwest corner of State Road 32 and County Road 200 West. Property is currently zoned LEAP and within the advanced manufacturing subdistrict, which is important when we get into the details of the site. So first, I'll kind of give you an idea how the process works for development plans as it relates to the LEAP district, because it is a little bit unique. There is an additional review step. So before an applicant can file their development plan application with the city, they must first submit their development details to the Architectural Review Committee for the LEAP district. And that is basically the LEAP district has what I would essentially call an HOA, Homeowners Association on steroids. They do have an executive board and then an architecture review board that review those things very similar to an HOA in a neighborhood might do. Right now, that is a board because the IEDC is a majority landowner. That architecture review board has 3 members from the IEDC. There is a member from the city, which is myself, and a member from the county commissioners, which is Tim Byer. And then we also have assistance from MKSK to essentially having written the standards to review those standards and make sure that they were addressing everything appropriately. And so that application was submitted late last year. I think it was either late November, early December to that board. The board had a meeting and completed a review of that and provided about a 2-page letter with some comments and questions back to the applicant. And the applicant did respond to all those comments and questions and make some changes to the site plan based on those comments, resubmitted that, and then did receive that approval from the Architecture Review Committee in mid-December. And so that allowed them then to submit their development plan application to the city earlier this year, which they have done. And so the development plan review from the Plan Commission is very similar to any other development plan review. We're essentially looking at the development standards for the LEAP district, ensuring they meet all of those standards. And if we can come to the conclusion that they do, then the expectation is the Plan Commission would then issue an approval of that, assuming they do meet all those standards. And so it is a little bit more detailed, obviously, in the LEAP district, the standards. And so this will be a little bit deeper dive from me tonight to go through all of those standards, because we got a variety of buffer requirements, a variety of setback standards, et cetera, that are specific to this that are unique in the LEAP district. So I will go through each of them a little bit more specifically than we typically do. As such. So that is the process that is before you tonight, and it has gone through that first step from the Architecture Review Committee and is before the Plan Commission tonight for development plan consideration. So I'll orient you to the site, go through some of the details of how the site's laid out. I'll show you some renderings that give you an idea from the perimeters what the site looks like, and then I'll walk through some elements of the staff report and some of those details. So first is the site location that you see highlighted here in yellow. This is approximately 200 acres. State Road 32 is the northern boundary. 200 West is the eastern boundary. And then you see the acreage outlined here in yellow. It doesn't necessarily follow existing parcel lines. They're doing some changes to that as part of the development of this site. But that is the 200 acres, give or take, that represent the boundaries of the site here. So moving forward then, and what I'll do is orient you overall to the site here, walk through some of the details on how the site works, and then go through those renderings. So this is an overall rendering of the site, if you will. Again, you can see State Road 32 is on the northern boundary, 200 West is on the eastern boundary. And the site is a collection of 7 different buildings connected by a central corridor that you kind of see running through here. And the buildings sit, generally speaking, in a little bit of an L shape, fronting on 200 West and State Road 32. And then back a house, kind of the utility areas, the storage tanks, the overhead doors, dock doors, et cetera, are tucked in the back so that they would be screened by the buildings from the roads towards the interior of the site. What you see represented here, State Road 32, again, is going to be upgraded as part of an NDOT project and become limited access. So you can see their access points are off of 200 West as a result. The primary access point is here on this northern access, where there would be a security gate. The primary truck access is this southern access point that you see here because they're more easily get back to that, again, that utility back of house area. They suggested that this center drive wouldn't be regularly used, but it's there in case there is some sort of emergency to get in and out of the site. But the primary access points are going to be this north one and south one. As part of the Architecture Review Committee, we did ask them to show existing driveways that are on the east side of 200 West. What we were trying to ensure was that these access points would not be directly across from somebody's house. So you wouldn't have the headlights in the front windows that you used to have in some places. So they did show all of those existing drive cuts all the way along here, so that we could do that review as part of the Architecture Review Committee. That's not something specific to the LEAP district, but that Architecture Review Committee can review some of those additional items like that. So we did want to make sure that there wouldn't be any sort of intrusive access points along there. What you see in these dark areas. Actually, I'll start with, they have a large detention facility at the northeast corner. They're really trying to create a view shed from State Road 32 to the site towards the admin building that you see here. And so the landscape area out here would be a detention facility. And then these large, I'll call them dark green blobs, for lack of a more technical term, represent the mounds that they're proposing along State Road 32 and along 200 West. They range from 6 to 8 feet along State Road 32 and 10 to 12 feet along 200 West and along this southern boundary. And I'll get into more detail about why that is here in a moment. The one other thing I did want to point out about how this is laid out, I did label each one of these buildings, so I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see it better. You can get an idea. Each one of these buildings varies in height from the shortest building of about 42 feet to the tallest building about 117 feet. And I've labeled those so you can see that here. And then I can explain why in a moment when I get into some of the setback standards. So you can see there's the 7 buildings here. This building that's on the far north towards State Road 32 is about 87, 88 feet at its tallest point. And on a lot of these buildings, the tallest point is the stairwell areas that stick up taller than the rest of the building. So the actual building roof itself is about 80 or 81 feet, but you do have some points where that building goes up to 87 feet for those stairwell corridors. These 2 buildings to the back here, this one is 42 feet, and this is the tallest building on the site. This is a small molecule building. This is 117 feet. The lab admin building, which is our primary office portion, it varies from 40 to 60 feet. So I've put 61 feet being the tallest point of the building is how that's labeled. The central utility building is back here. It averages about 45 feet at the tallest point. And then the buildings that you see down here, you've got the biologics here on the eastern side, closest to 200 West at 87 feet. And then the dry logistics behind here is 42 feet. And so it's important to note these heights because when you get into the LEAP district standards, the setback varies based on the building height. And so I'll get into that here in a moment. But I did want to point that out here because those were used to determine the setbacks from 200 West. So moving on a little bit, you'll see here labeled on this overall site plan, 1 and 2, there's going to be a couple of viewpoints that I'll show you here that are from the State Road 32 side of the campus. 3 is an aerial view over top of the northeast corner of the site looking down onto the campus. The fourth one would be a view from 200 West. And then the fifth one is actually a view towards the back side of the property here. And then there's a couple of them that show the entrance area. So I'll walk through those. So this first one here is that north side on the State Road 32 side, although I will say that this viewpoint is not from State Road 32 because State Road 32 is quite a bit further back. This is more on their site looking southeast towards that far north building that you see here. Gives you an idea of some of the architectural design on that building. This one is again on the north side looking down almost directly south onto the campus. You can kind of see the primary building that's closest to State Road 32 in the foreground. And if you look towards the left in the background, you're starting to get a little bit of a glimpse of the admin building. And here's that aerial that's from the northeast corner of the property looking southwest. In the foreground now is a lab admin building. And you see that collection of additional buildings. These would be the buildings that are closest to State Road 32. These would be the buildings that are closest to 200 West. This view 4, again, is from the 200 West side. Again, I would say this is not from a viewpoint standing in the middle of 200 West. It's internal to their site. You can kind of get an idea. Again, this is the building closest to 200 West. You see on the left-hand side, and you're seeing in the background a little bit here, the lab admin building over here. And then this is back of house looking northeast. You can kind of get an idea of back sides of the buildings. They do have some storage tanks and dock doors, et cetera, in the back of house like you would expect. Here's again another aerial view. You can see the whole campus. This is the northwest corner looking southwest again. Another viewpoint from that northeast corner. And this is more towards the southwest corner of the site looking back northeast, an aerial view that you see here. One of the entrance views of the lab admin building on the front of the campus. And then this, I just wanted to touch on to give you kind of a broad view of the landscape plan for the site. You can see some of the details. And again, I'll go through more specifics when I get into the staff report. But this gives you an idea that mounding that you saw on that original site plan or the initial site plan. And then there's significant landscaping that augments that mound along the State Road 32 side based on the corridor buffer standards in the LEAP district. Again, you see here the mounding that was provided along the 200 West and along the south side here. The mounding is more like 10 to 12 feet tall. And again, the landscape plants that they're showing here, you can see then they've got a landscape plant package that's specific to the two ponds. And what the intention there in the LEAP district is to provide natural clusters of typical Indiana native plants that you would typically see adjacent to water to try to give them a more natural look. I'm sure you're going to be able to tell that it is a detention pond, but again, to try to soften up those edges of those ponds. And then again, the landscaping requirements that are associated with the parking lot that's adjacent to the lab admin building. So this just kind of gives you a broad view of that landscape plan, and I'll get into some specifics here in a little bit. So let's move on to the staff report, and I'll start with the setback standards associated with the LEAP district, and it's a little bit different here. So the first one, as soon as I can find the proper page, is the front building setback associated with State Road 32, which in the LEAP district is identified as a roadway corridor. And the front building setback off of a roadway corridor is 300 feet. By comparison, our general industrial district, which has the largest front setback, that's 100-foot setbacks. We're talking about 3 times that. And so on that, you can see that 300-foot line represented by the dashed line that you see running north here. In fact, I may go back to let's go back here. You can see that represented by this line. And so just the front setback requirement is a minimum of 300 feet. This northernmost building is 408 feet from the State Road 32 right-of-way or the property line. So they are further set back from State Road 32 than required. The second front building setback is related to 200 West, and this is actually a LEAP district perimeter because this is the perimeter. This is actually the exterior perimeter of the LEAP district. And the setback on the LEAP district perimeter that is associated with 200 West is 300 feet plus for every 1 foot over 50 feet that the building height is, you have to add 5 feet for every 1 feet. So in this case, that building, as I mentioned, is 87 feet right here. So that additional 37 feet over 50 feet added an additional 185 feet to that front setback. So on 200 West, their required minimum setback is 485 feet. And this easternmost building is 492 feet from the property line. So it's almost 500 feet from the property line, more than 500 feet from the center line at 200 West. There are also front parking setbacks. And so this is again on State Road 32. The front parking setback is 150 feet, which you can see represented by this dashed line here. And the closest parking is actually this parking lot adjacent to the building. But I went ahead and showed you what the setback was based on this service drive that goes around the building. So that the setback requirement is 150, and that drive is about 358 feet from that State Road 32 right-of-way line. So it's more than twice what the setback requirement is for parking. And actually, the actual parking lot you see here is more than that. The setback is more than that from 32, but I did want to show you from the closest pavement. Same thing on the Leap District perimeter on 200 West. The parking setback is 80 feet. And I did the dimension of this nearest service drive here, and that is 432 feet from that 200 West right-of-way line. So again, significantly more than what's required in the Leap District. There is also, where there are existing residential properties adjacent, there are setback requirements, more substantial setback requirements. And we do have an existing residential home that's directly south of this property, sits in this area adjacent to the southeast corner of the property. And so they have additional setback requirements associated with that property. So the building setback from this southeast property corner is 300 feet. And the closest building, which is this building up here, is about 900 feet from that south property line. So it's significant, about 3 times what the setback is. And then the internal parking setback is 160 feet. And again, I went from this drive here, and that's about 525 feet. So again, they're more than meeting those standards associated with that. And then to touch on these mounds and landscaping a little bit, this landscaping is significantly more than what's required. And that's because the Architecture Review Committee wanted to see some additional screening provided to those residential homes on 200 West and to the south here. So those mounds are quite a bit taller than required, and the landscaping, actually, there's quite a bit more, plus the fact they asked for additional evergreen trees because they provide a better screen when the material is more immature. So that was part of the review, and that's why you see those provided there. One other component that I forgot to touch on is they are proposing solar arrays to provide supplemental power to this site. And those arrays would be located in this area and then a portion of it in this area. And that's, again, why that Architecture Review Committee wanted to see those mounds a little bit taller to provide better screening, again, to those adjacent properties to just screen those from view as well. Couple other things, maximum building height in the Leap District is 200 feet. And again, as I mentioned, the tallest building on here is 117 feet, but they range anywhere from 40 to 117 feet. So they are well underneath the maximum building height requirement. Maximum lot coverage in the Leap District is 70%. Right now, with what they're showing, they're at about 41%. So they're significantly under the maximum lot coverage. I will point out, though, that there's a reason why there's a rectangle shape here, and that's because they wanted to leave some property out here for potential future expansion. They don't have any plans for that now, but they did want to make sure that they had a buildable site here if they ever had a need for expansion. And that's what you see represented by about 30 acres in this area here that's wrapped up by that detention pond. So now to move on to the parking requirements in the Leap District. And again, I'm going through this in a lot more detail than I typically would, but this is the first time that we're reviewing that. So in terms of the actual parking space requirements, for an industrial and manufacturing use, it is 1 space per employee on the largest shift. And then for advanced manufacturing, research and development, it's 4 spaces per 1,000 square feet. And the reason I put both of those is because you've got this lab admin building that falls more in that advanced manufacturing R&D. And so that's where the 4 spaces per 1,000 feet comes from. And for everything else on here, we use that 1 space per employee on the largest shift standard. And what they have shown here does fit within those requirements. And just to kind of give you a quick summary, there's 459 standard spaces. They have 26 EV vehicle spaces, 10 ADA accessible spaces, and 50 bicycle spaces, again, that meet all of those parking requirements that are associated with the Leap District. And in addition to that, there's some additional parking requirements that they have met here. So in the Leap District, surface parking lots can be a maximum dimension of 100 by 150 before requiring landscape separation. So if I zoom in a little bit here on the parking area, you can kind of again see how they've accomplished that, because we didn't want large seas of parking. And so what they've done then is you can see these green separation areas, particularly in the parking lot that's in front of the building that will be most visible from State Road 32. They provided these landscape islands that separate those out, and then also some pretty significantly sized landscape islands to the north and south sides of the parking area, again, to make sure that they meet those separation requirements for that parking, so you don't end up having large seas of parking without some sort of landscape separation. And then additionally, for parking lots larger than 300 cars, which is larger than 300 cars, a minimum of 25% of the spaces shall be covered by solar canopies to provide some additional solar capacity there. And so they have, while you can't see them in this rendering necessarily, but in this northern part of the parking lot and in the southern part of the parking lot, they have provided those solar canopies to meet that 25% requirement. And that essentially is, it's going to look like a roof over the parking space. So you really won't be able to see the solar panels, but they will essentially be covered. They'll look like covered parking spaces. The next parking requirement, again, for parking lots of this size, a portion of it is required to be permeable pavers or porous concrete to allow some rainwater to be able to soak through the parking lot rather than just running off. And again, they have met that permeable paver or porous concrete requirement. And again, as I mentioned before, they're required a certain percentage of electric vehicle parking spaces, which they have provided, and also that bicycle parking. So landscaping, and this will be the last big one that I want to go through. So the first element is the roadway green belt, and that would be the landscape buffer that is required along the State Road 32 corridor and also the 200 West corridor. So you've got a roadway corridor and then a LEAP district perimeter roadway green belt. They are required to be a minimum of 160 feet from the wide right-of-way, which they have provided in both cases. And then within the green belt, they have to provide mounding ranging from 6 to 8 feet in height, which again, as I mentioned, they provided a 6 to 8 foot tall mound on the 32 side, but it does get taller on 200 West because of the ARC review. And so they have provided the mounding and natural tree groupings distributed evenly throughout. And so for every 200 lineal feet, the green belt needs to include at least 10 deciduous trees, 4 evergreen trees, 4 ornamental trees and or large shrubs, and a mixture of native tall grass and prairie mix. And so the applicant has proposed to require mounding and plantings along both frontages. And as a result of the Architecture Review Committee, as I mentioned, they have increased the height of the mound along 200 West and provided some additional landscape screening. The second one is the internal residential greenbelt. And as I mentioned, that's where it's adjacent to an existing residential use. So that's this southeast corner here. And so the internal residential greenbelt is a minimum of 160 feet again. And in terms of the plantings, there's the similar plantings to the roadway greenbelt, which again, they have provided that 10 to 12 foot tall mound and landscaping meeting those requirements as well. And the next landscaping element is the stormwater detention pond landscaping, which I mentioned when we were going through the landscape plan. And it says all ponds will feature a natural shape and be planted and graded in an attractive manner with a simple edge of meadow grass, wetland plantings, and emergent areas and tree groupings. And that's, again, as I went through the landscape plan, that's what they have provided as a result of that ARC review. Parking lot landscaping. Perimeter landscaping, which includes 7 shrubs every 7 shrubs every 35 lineal feet and trees planted 35 feet on center around the perimeters, which they have provided. And the interior includes at least 5% interior parking lot landscaping and a minimum of 1 island every 50 parking spaces. Again, we kind of walk through how they've provided that interior parking lot landscape that you see here and have met that parking requirement. Building-based landscaping. One other element here is that this is in the thoroughfare overlay district, which is part of our existing ordinance associated with State Road 32, requiring building-based landscaping, which they have provided along the fronts of the admin lab, hybrid, and biologics buildings, where they'd be most visible from 32 and 200 West. So essentially along the frontages here of all 3 of these buildings closest to those. So they have met all those requirements as well. A couple of final elements here. So on the signage plan, they have shown us some typical signage, but that's one of the elements that they're still working on. And so similar to how we've done in the past, where that's an element where the signage contractor is hired last, essentially. They have provided us some typical signage to give us an idea what the concepts for the signage will be, but they're still working on that. And so one of the conditions you'll see when I get to that is that they would complete that signage plan, provide it to staff for review, and so we can ensure it meets all the LEAP district standards. And they would need to do that prior to applying for any signage permits with our office. And then the final component is a lighting plan. Let me get to the right. So one thing just to also highlight about the LEAP district, in addition to having the traditional lighting standards that you would expect, light pole heights, lighting maximums, and photometric plans showing that they meet lighting standards at the property lines. In addition, in the LEAP district, lighting plans are required to comply with the International Dark Sky Association friendly goals. And really the goals there are to minimize light pollution, light brightness, and prevent negative effects on the natural environment. And so while I was also making sure site users are safe. So while they're, again, if the sign contractor is the last person hired, the lighting contractor is second to last. So that is something that is still being worked on. They have provided us kind of an initial plan where they're showing where light poles might be located on the site, but they're still working on that photometric plan and making sure that they meet those International Dark Sky Association standards. But that's something that's still in the works. And again, is one of the conditions we would suggest that that would be something that they would need to supply to our office for review before we would release any building permits. So that's the last component that I wanted to highlight. In terms of architecture review in the LEAP district, there's components related to horizontal and vertical delineations to create vertical interest in the elevations, using changes in colors, materials, windows, entryway areas, and or, like the stairwell towers that I mentioned, those provide breaks in the window. So they have provided all those standards. The LEAP district additionally includes a chart of building materials that are permitted within the advanced manning subdistrict. And so the proposed campus includes, again, as I mentioned, those 7 buildings, and they have provided an architectural design that meets all of those material and design standards. So, and again, I went through those renderings, so I won't go back through those again. So kind of to finish it off, this was a lot, but I wanted to make sure that you guys all had a chance to review all those LEAP district standards for the first time. And I know we do have some people here in the audience that are around this site and are going to be very curious about this as well. So I wanted to go through in a lot of detail. But to finish it off, in review of the submitted development plan as presented, Lebanon planning staff finds compliance with the Unified Development Ordinance requirements for the subject site. And staff recommends approval of the subject development plan contingent on the following conditions. The first one would be that the applicant adequately address any remaining City of Lebanon Technical Advisory Committee comments prior to application for any building permits and site improvements. And just again to highlight that, we have a technical committee that represents like Lebanon Utilities, Boone RMC, Boone County Surveyor's Office, all those technical folks, city engineer, that are reviewing the construction plans for technical details, going into a lot more detail even than I went into here tonight. And they're still working on a lot of those comments right now. So this is, again, a pretty typical condition we place on these while they're just getting a planning approval tonight. Or theoretically getting a planning approval, there are still technical comments they need to address before they can get final release. The second one is stormwater approval, and they are going through drainage reviews right now through the city and county's consultant, but there are also some surveyor's office regulated drains that cross this site. So there will be some drainage board approvals or surveyor's office approvals that they will need. So the second one for stormwater approval, it would be that the applicant receive formal drainage approval from the City of Lebanon and or the Boone County Surveyor as necessary prior to application for any building permits. The third and fourth I mentioned already. The third is the lighting plan, and that would be that the applicant provide a lighting plan that adheres to all applicable UDO standards prior to application for any building permits. And finally, the signage plan, that the applicant would provide a signage plan that adheres to all applicable UDO standards prior to installation of any signage. And with that, a very quick review of the site, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Ben, you might need a snack.
At least a drink.
Excuse me, Commission, any questions for Ben before does the applicant want to speak? I would imagine. Yep. So any questions for Ben before we hear from the applicant?
Real quick on the lighting, and I don't know, because there's residential homes around it. So what kind of lighting is going to be allowed? Like, is it going to be the LED? Like, is it going to be a lower?
One Darth Vader allows, remember?
Yeah. So they've started working on a general plan, and it's showing LED, which those are directional. So that's what a lot of people are using now, because you don't get a lot of light spillage from that. So they are doing that, and they've started showing that planning in the LEDs. And then what they'll do is provide a photometric plan for us. And in the LEAP district, there's a maximum light intensity even in the middle of the site. And then there's also a maximum intensity at the property line. So we'll have to ensure that in that photometric plan, they're meeting all those foot candle measurements. And there is a lower maximum where it's adjacent to residential homes. And then we'll also be looking to make sure that like the light emitting source is not visible from those adjacent properties. So what I mean by that is the actual surface of the light is not facing the properties, which is where you get the glares. So you have to make sure those are either turned away from adjacent properties or properly shielded. So those are the kinds of things we're looking for. And also those international dark sky standards address a lot of that too.
And do the lighting signage standards, do those go back to the review committee? Or is that?
No, as the review committee made a determination that they would defer to staff to make sure that it meets the LEAP district standards. And there are some specific standards associated with the LEAP district that are beyond just the general UDO. But they went ahead and gave that approval, deferring those reviews to staff.
Ben, when you mentioned something about State Road 32 upgrades,
Yeah.
is that what's in the state's they're not letting them put an entrance on 32 at all? That's what they're saying?
Yeah, and Kevin maybe can address this a little more, but basically from 200 west, then heading west, it'll become limited access. Is that correct?
Yes, that is the state's intention, that it would be limited access.
They realize the increase of heavy traffic, right?
Yes, so their intention is to widen it to 4 lanes, 2 in each direction, with a median.
It's like 52, got it.
But I would say a more urban cross section. The median will have curbs on it and be raised. The outside pavement edge will have curbs. There'll also be sidewalks and asphalt paths. There are
They'll probably be on 200 also, won't it?
yes,
Okay.
and then they are proposing 5 roundabouts. 1 at Enterprise, 1 at 200 West, 300 West, 400 West, 500 West. 500 West is basically the completion of the state's project.
I guess me who drove a delivery truck for years just looks at this and goes, it seems like it's so much more logical to have a north entrance, at least for the heavy truck entrances. I mean, I've delivered to so many warehouses over the years where they've just crammed everything, just like this is going to do. The traffic going into the office complex, the traffic going into the deliveries, and the semis all taking the same road. And it can create a traffic nightmare. And I'm looking at it as just as having the heavy truck entrance sitting on the far west side would seem to be so much more logical.
Yeah, and I certainly let the applicant talk a little bit about how many deliveries. I mean, this isn't necessarily a distribution site, so I'll let them talk about like what their traffic volumes look like. And actually, they've had to provide a traffic study, and that's that was an input into the state's design to make sure that all of this works the way it's intended. And they're looking at essentially build out of the LEAP district based on, and that's what the design is based on. I totally understand. But in terms of moving NDOT's primary goal is to make sure traffic on State Road 32 is moving through the area. And so there are a lot of the US 52 has some limited access areas too, but that's essentially what they're doing here is trying to make sure that they're moving traffic through the area, which would mean limiting turning points.
Yeah, I can imagine it's probably going to be a double lane roundabout at most of them.
Oh, it'd have to be.
Yes.
Yeah.
It'll be a specific lane to get over to.
They would all be double lane
Itself.
roundabouts, and Ben's
Yeah.
exactly right. The idea of the redesign is to move traffic through. So not having those people stopping to turn left or right or slowing down.
Right.
They will make those turns at roundabout.
Obviously, the speed will probably come down too. I would
At a
assume.
roundabout, the speed would be reduced.
Nobody will be kicking up at 55 miles an hour coming into that roundabout, hopefully.
Depends on how many lanes you use, I guess, to move through.
Yeah.
Why not? Just curious.
Well, I mean, I have my Dukes of Hazzard days, but not now.
Right. Anyway, moving on. Any other questions from the commission for Ben? Perfect. There's a couple of you here. If the applicant would like to speak, I think Ben is clearing off the podium there for potential.
Side are we on here? So, good evening. My name is Matt Zirkelbach. I'm the site head at the Lilly Medicine Foundry. So I guess good news is that through that thorough review that you just went through, a number of the renderings that I plan to show you, you've already seen. So I'll give a little bit of context to it, but it shouldn't take as much to go through. Okay. So really what my plan tonight for the council and for folks here is to kind of walk through a little bit of what the Lilly Medicine Foundry is. I know, right, we've been going through and there's been a number of meetings now with the sister sites that are on the other side of 65 with LP1 and LP2. We didn't want to call ours LP3, so we called it the Lilly Medicine Foundry. But in all reality, right, it's a different scope, and that's what I'm planning to speak a little bit to on this slide. So the Medicine Foundry and what we represent is the clinical supply for what would eventually, if it's commercialized, would become the drugs for tomorrow's Lilly portfolio. So these are the things that would be entering into clinical trials in phase 1, moving through to larger clinical studies in phase 2, and then a final summative study in phase 3 before it'd be submitted for approval and then off into the market if it were. So with that means a couple different things as opposed to a traditional manufacturing site. We're not going to be dealing with the same high level of volumes whenever you think about production and what that looks like on the floor. But we'll also be doing a lot more molecules. And as you see, as it was already described as well, we'll be dealing with a lot of different modalities. So it's not like a traditional, again, manufacturing site where you have very few SKUs or very few specific flavors, and you're doing a high volume. We're on the other end of the spectrum where we have a multitude of different modalities that we will run within the site at a lower volume and a lower batch rate. So, but the intent, again, as you can kind of see here, is it's focused on what we call API, or the active pharmaceutical ingredient, AKA the part of the drug that does the work. So it's also called the drug substance, right? Which then later be formulated into a drug product at a different location. And that would be the final format that would be presented for volunteers within the clinical trials. So from a technology perspective, we laid out quite a few here, but in effect, it represents nearly everything that Lilly has within its portfolio. So these are things from the traditional modalities that would be formed into pills, but also things into different injection types, as well as some of the advanced technologies that we now have further in our portfolio that allow for long duration dosing. So again, because of that, you're talking, 6 months, year. So it's a very different treatment paradigm. So again, for that, in order to create clinical trial material, it looks different from a production process perspective. The site is designed to accommodate that difference. The other part that kind of highlights at the bottom is it's a focus on innovation and manufacturing. So in fitting with the bill for the LEAP district, the intent with what this site will do is it will not only bring the next generation of medicines forward, but also the next generation of advanced manufacturing techniques and the associated functions that will be needed to actually execute that. So this falls in line with advanced manufacturing capabilities that have been described, also falls in line with what we're looking to establish as far as partnerships with academic partners, both with Purdue University in the North, Ivy Tech as well, right? So we have the ability to have qualified individuals that can meet across the sciences, across engineering disciplines, but also operators, technicians, supply chain, logistics, all the different components commensurate there. And I think the rest has already been discussed, right? So the investment, right, in total as announced is $4.5 billion. For this particular site, it's on the 200-acre plot that we've just been talking about. And the intended plan here is that we'll bring 400 Lilly employees to work here. But then again, right, the other thing that we've seen, it's been presented as well, is typically it's about a 4-to-1 ratio of total economic impact for jobs created relative to the actual primary role within Lilly. So again, I promise I won't go into too much detail, but just kind of give a little bit of context. These were some of the renderings. I think this one should look familiar. This is I'll call it the bird's eye from at that 45-degree angle from the front at the intersection point between 32 and 200. And the overview, right? So again, just a little bit here. As I mentioned, what we have are those in the buildings that were described in the 7 buildings of the main campus. 3 of those are the production nodes of what we call them. So one being the small molecule, which is traditional chemistry. You would think that would form into your pills, tablets, things in that modality, but sometimes injectables. Biologics, those get into some of the other longer acting things and also things that act more on your immune system. And then the third one is the hybrid. And that gets into more of the next generation manufacturing approaches. That gets into your oligonucleotides, some of the peptides, things like that are more in the cutting edge of what we're doing from a science perspective. And that would be handled in that hybrid suite. Then you have, again, as mentioned, the lab admin, the logistics buildings that support it as well, and that corridor that was described earlier. Also, as already called out, you can actually see on this rendering a little bit with the gray blocks at the bottom, the proposed photovoltaic arrays, where those will be located, what that will look like behind the berming. As well as you can't see it clearly on here, but as I also mentioned before, the canopies, the solar canopies, will be a part of the parking structure or the parking area as well. And they already described berming and landscaping that will border the facility on 3 of the 4 sides. And these are similar to what you saw before. I'll say the reason why I'll pause briefly on these is these give you an idea of what the view would be on the other side of the berming. So whereas some of the other ones were more proximal to the building, these are similar, but further out. So it gives more of a reflection of what the rendering is going to tell us about what the final fit and finish would look like when we finish construction and have the landscaping plan deployed from different angles. So again, these are from 32. This is an example from 200 West. So again, you can see locations of the berming, access road, and the plants that would go along from a landscaping perspective. And then inside the facility. So this is just one representation, or as my son likes to call it, the Roblox representation. So what this is basically is the kind of block rendering of what a typical inside room would look like in one of these production areas. We designed them what we would call a clean room format. So these are all fully designed that they can be done in a low microbial load, so easy to clean, hard surfaces on walls, ceilings, floors, appropriate drainage, containment strategies. You have filtered air supply that will be put into the room, and you have full containment within all of the different components that are used to make the drugs contained within. This, again, just being one representation, but I know oftentimes you see these gray and brown hued boxes, but this is what's inside those. Unfortunately, the renderings aren't far enough along. I can't show you what an actual photorealistic version is. So I'm showing you boxes inside of boxes at this phase of our development. But again, as we continue to progress here, we'll be able to bring more forth as far as what these look like. From a site utilities perspective, these are some of the more recent things that have gone through with some of the other planning in the commission meetings. But you can see here, we try to call out the major supplies into the Medicine Foundry. So water called out on the top there. And I think this is some of the recent past few weeks that have gone through as far as allocating what the EDUs would look like for the site and what the plan would look like there. We've also, at this point in time, been able to provide projected peak and average loads for the facility. And also, too, there will, from a water utility perspective, there will be an underground private fire water system, again, for in case of emergencies or anything to be needed there. And then also our own ability to store on-site surge tanks in order to support that. Wastewater will have a treatment capability there for anything before it is discharged outside our facility, or anything that is not traditional treated wastewater is then will be removed from the facility in tanker format. Gas will be, as mentioned here, provided by medium pressure line, then eventually from feeding off of the high pressure line. And then we will have, as mentioned here, a temporarily fed 33 megawatt substation, and then eventually that will be converted to the final placement from an electrical supply perspective. And as also mentioned as well, we'll have the photovoltaic array that'll be on site to supplement site load. Traffic, right? So this is one thing that's discussed. Similar to what was shown before, trying to highlight a little bit here of planned routes. So you can see here, I think it was actually just discussed, right, of what some of the road construction changes would look like from NDOT along 32. But the intent there is that would be the major thoroughfare to bring traffic alongside. We would have an emergency on the northern border there, you can see highlighted there. But then during construction phase, that central route would actually be the proposed input there for the traditional construction and site traffic. And then the lower route there, the plan for heavy construction traffic, trucks, larger vehicles. And again, this is during the construction phase, and of course that will convert over once everything is fully formed and we have site security and the rest of those facilities up and deployed. And then the other thing, again, just to kind of highlight from an overall project perspective, right? So everything is designed, not to mention, in meeting with what we just went through from a review perspective to make sure it meets LEAP district regulations and guidances. But further, we're looking beyond that. So, we obviously are going to be in compliance with all the federal, state, and local governances. As you couldn't really see from the block diagram of the inside, everything is designed within this facility, also keeping in line with being the next generation from what we'll be producing from a medicines perspective. We'll have next generation technology using that. So everything from, having a digitized plant, leveraging electronic systems versus paper for documentation. So a lot of the other different systems that allow us to actually make medicines faster and more effectively. But then also have a much more robust supply. And frankly, this is the intent of the facility, is not only a physical facility that will be standing here for decades, but having the infrastructure inside of it that'll be durable through that same time frame as well. LEED certification, going beyond, again, just from the solar array, from a site perspective as far as a build, and from an energy efficiency perspective will be part of it as well. The waste disposal, as I mentioned, we won't have any buried transfer lines. So as part of the chemical processes, if we have any sort of movement of material from one area to another, that will not be underground. It will be through contained, controlled piping and containment systems. The equipment itself, again, designed for high efficiency because in general, right, it's good for the process, but it's also good for the environment. And the other part too, from a production perspective, everything was done and will be done under what we call GMP, or good manufacturing practices, which is the general guidance that's provided for anyone that's producing medicines for human consumption. And lastly the rest of the requisite and other governing bodies that would oversee a facility of this nature. So with that is all I had. Again, I tried to skip over some of the content there based upon the review that we just had before this. So thank you all for your time.
Very good. Thank you. Commissioners, any questions for the applicant?
Hi, I have a few questions.
Sure.
Will any trials actually take place here, or would those go to a clinical, like to a hospital or something?
Yeah, it's a great question. So no, at this site, it will just be manufacturing of the drug substance. So not even the completed form that will eventually then go to the clinical trial, but all those will go through our clinical trial program at the hospital or the clinic or the location where that would be.
Okay, and then for site security, are just the entrances for vehicles going to be gated, or is there potentially going to be a fence surrounding the entire, 200 acres?
To speak to the specifics of that, I can defer, but there is, I understand, a contiguous fence that will be around the entire facility as well. As well as then the only openings then would have access gates as well.
Okay, and for the solar panels, what will the ground cover be for that? Will that have like a natural ground cover, or would that have more like pavement or something underneath it? Hey, Ben.
That would be great if you've got better insight. I was going to say it's a great question.
I didn't have it this morning. Sorry.
Yeah. So in the LEED district, actually within the entire city, we have a requirement for a pollinator-friendly ground cover.
Awesome.
So that will all be some sort of vegetative ground cover that meets those standards. And actually, I think Purdue has some guidance on what pollinator-friendly is defined as within Indiana. So it's all native pollinator-friendly material. So that's what would be under those EV arrays.
The tree hugger in me is very thankful to hear that.
Okay,
So thank you. And then my other question kind of around that area would be, there's a large field, 30 acres, I think is what you said is estimated. So I didn't see any plans right now. Is there going to be potentially an amenity for employees for kind of quality of life, being a pathway, gardens, something other than just mowing 30 acres? Yeah,
absolutely. I think, for actually, I'll take that in reverse order. So the intent for anything that, we don't have any on that would still be a fallow land, we would want it to be similar to natural meadow land, right? So not the intent that we would have perfectly rolled manicured like the outfield in a baseball field for any shape of imagination. But actually to that point, absolutely, there's intent to have outdoor amenities that allow for that traffic. So having a walking path that goes around. But furthermore, I think there's also some opportunities as we get closer to figure out, what sort of, ideas we can have relative to that space while it does remain in that fallow state.
It's Lebanon is doing a really incredible job with focusing on bike paths and great sidewalks, and it's very important to my family, my life, and so it's something I feel like is important to think about as you kind of come into the community with carrying that on. So that's really what I wanted to ask about. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
My question involves, I mean, I'll commend you guys. You've actually done a really good job of actually, it looks at least shielding your neighbors on 200, the residential site. I just only saw one where if you look on the map, the driveway, the whole house, it's still going to see everything. It's right across the street from it's going to be the main entrance with the security. Is there an option to put a berm in there too? I mean, that's the only thing I see on that whole 200 thing that I'm just looking at going, there should maybe be one sitting there.
I'll defer on what we have from a flexibility from a berming perspective, but I'd say the other part too is I'm not sure how photorealistic the berms are in the drawing relative to what we can do when we actually get to earth moving. But fair point. I think that was also called out with the design perspective to at least make sure we offset as much as possible for all those.
Everyone was there except for that one that I saw. I'm going,
That's right. Yeah, at 10 to 12 feet too, right? The intent is that would be more than higher than any first floor of any building adjacent to the property.
Another question I had, you did mention all the mitigation for a lot of the things that you do there. Appreciate that. And Lily's probably one of the better ones at that now from what I've read. So with that in mind, though, I mean, what is, with all the stuff that's going to be going on there, just a question, what is the highest hazard risk of all those things that go on there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing when you think about the processes that we do, again, to your point, right? A lot of what our focus is now is not only new innovations in the medicine themselves, but also the chemical processes or biological processes used. So we focus on a lot of what we call green chemistry. And a lot of that's designed to minimize, what some of the historical industrial processes that were involved. But from the residuals, I mean, the biggest things you would consider in these spaces are, one, because of the volumes you're working with, would just be the spill and just like the actual impact of it itself. And again, with that, the cleanup and the fire water and everything we mentioned before, that's also part of the containment strategy there. But again, it's designed with overflow, what we call with underground concrete pools. So it's all fully contained if there was anything. But from an actual chemical perspective, the biggest hazard, if you were to look at it, would likely be flammability. But again, that's where we take nothing else than what we can find is the best processes to mitigate either the concentration of the flammable, the period of time it would be in a flammable state, but then also from a containment and control perspective, how we can keep the processes. So if there was anything that were to begin to present as a potential problem, the process can immediately shut itself off.
And on that, the question would be would be, as you go along and change some of your chemical processes to get everything done, will it require our local fire department to actually have some specific equipment once in a while added?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. One we've been talking about, again, because, we have LP1, LP2 on the other side, right, that are doing scaled processes as well. So what we term that broader concept, right? Fire, medical supply, everything else is life safety, including our health and safety evaluation organization. And so in that case, yes, absolutely. It'll either be something that will be supplemented, it'll be part of a training protocol with a broader Lebanon or even Boone County surrounding area. But then we're also looking at as well, because of some of the specialized training, of having dedicated staffing that'll be a part of our overall site plan and part of our footprint too. So the intent when we bring these all together is you'll have an entire community approach, not only what needs to be localized on site, but then also, to your point, requisite training for all the folks who might encounter at any point in time should anything ever occur. That's a great question.
Any other questions from the commission?
Sorry, with that, if there was like specialized equipment that needed to be used for it, would that be something that's housed then? Like, how would you work with the community to be able to provide that? Or would that be something that would be specific at your location?
Lily would ensure that if we had a process that required any sort of requisite specialized equipment, which, I mean, for this point, we're talking standard firefighting equipment for the most part, or appropriate hazmat and hazmat training. So if that were the case, we would have the capability of that ourselves, and or it'd be something partnered with, and there would be a clear way in which we would delineate what that responsibility would be like as we got to those points.
I might add to that because I spoke with the fire department about this. So they're actually building a fire station up at the LP1, LP2 site that right now will be staffed by Lilly employees, but they're already talking about how that facility could provide backup to the foundry site because they'll obviously have some specific equipment and training there. So while we're also going to be doing some training equipment specific to the Lebanon Fire Department, that facility up there that will be Lilly's fire department will also provide backup to this site as well.
Also, just as a reminder too, that portion of TAC, I think, is pretty much clear, the fire safety piece. But if they do have to get an ARF, that's a pretty cool piece of equipment, just saying. Just nerding out for a second.
I have my own list of cool equipment I want in the plant, so we can add this to the outside the plant, but also cool list. Yeah.
I'll help test drive that one. It's fine. Very cool. Any other from the commission? Perfect. Thank you very much for your information.
Thank you all.
This is a public hearing, so a couple of things on the public hearing. If you could please limit yourself to 3 minutes and try not to repeat someone before you, that would be greatly appreciated. And then once you come to the microphone, if you can give us name and address for the record. If you haven't signed in yet, you can sign in at the end. No big deal. But I will officially open the public hearing. So if anyone would like to speak, feel free.
Hi, my name is Glenn Beasy. I live at 71 South, 200 West, right across the road from this project. So, Lily, good for you. This is a beautiful looking project. Good for the people that are going to benefit from the products that you're going to manufacture. Not so good for the folks that live on 200 West. Anybody know how tall the courthouse is? It's a 5-story building with the dome. Would you say maybe 100 feet? So we're going to have buildings the size of the courthouse across the road from our homes that we put anchors down that, we thought we were living in somewhat rural area for a time. I'm in the transportation industry. So I drive equipment that brings materials, that has brought materials to your other site. I know how that traffic goes. I know what I'm going to see on the road that I live on. Semi-traffic. We already have semis coming up and down 200 West. It's not allowed. It's not supposed to be. It's been posted. No one enforces those rules at all. If you widen 200 West even to 2 lanes each direction divided, if you've ever been through the business park, you see semis sitting out there on the road all the time. So you're not just going to be dealing with the semis going in and out of Lilly, but all of the semis that are taking 200 West as a back way in and out of the business park. And I foresee 200 West being a boulevard that ends up tying into the south side of the Lebanon Business Park. So that being said, it's putting a lot of undue and unforeseen strain on the people that live on 200 West. So I would implore you to be good neighbors. Look to purchasing the land that the people that live on that road live on, so we wouldn't have to live through this. And if you don't want to use it for your facility, then market it out to someone else that may complement what you got going on there. But don't make the people in that area live through all of this, because it's going to be very, very difficult on us. You've got 87 and 117 foot buildings there. We'll have no privacy on our property whatsoever. We just put a pool in our backyard. Now, everybody that's going to be anywhere above the mounds are going to look in our backyard and see us enjoying our pool. It's not what we thought when we moved into that place. So again, we know where we are. We're in Lebanon on I-65. We know that growth is going to happen. We just didn't think we were going to get pinched in. So be good neighbors to us and get us out of there before this goes on. Be fair to us, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Jeff Newman, live at 195 North, 200 West. Not quite, but just about across the road from that secondary entrance, the one that they think isn't going to be used very much. I'll try to keep it within my 3 minutes. Got a lot of questions. I think Lily has done, a great job trying to be a good business to come to this community and a good neighbor as much as they can. I worked for Lilly for about 4 years. I think we did some great things there. I think they continue to do great things. And I do wish them all the best with the facility. I hope that it can look the best, but also operate the best for them. But that said, when LEAP was coming in and some of these guidelines were set out, I don't think that 200 West or roads like that with that heavy of residential occupancy were really planned to be essentially the main entrance for some of these facilities. I understand the setbacks, the guard shack, et cetera, but in essence, 200 West is becoming the main entrance for all of the traffic that's going to come into this facility. I do hope, I didn't quite catch what was said about the entrance off of 32 for construction or secondary. But if you imagine 1,000 to 2,000 potential construction workers daily that's coming in the morning, possibly running off someplace for lunch, and then departing in the evening. So coming in and out that many times, what's that going to do to 200 West? But then also, what is that going to do to 32 at that intersection if they don't find a way to kind of take that on down the road and actually build, some lanes or whatever to help manage that traffic? Then it's going to be 400 employees or so coming in. I don't know, staggered shifts, other things can be done, cafeteria on site to mitigate how much traffic is coming in and out, to try to delay that traffic. But it's only a few hundred feet from 32 to get to that entrance. How many cars can actually back up there and then back up on 32 as they're trying to go through, badge through, et cetera? So essentially 200 is the entrance for Lilly. Having the truck entrance down at the south end, again, don't think that's a great idea. That brings it past pretty much everybody on 200 West. That's where we walk, in the evenings or wherever. Kids are dropped off from school. We've got several in the area that are older that used to walk the road, don't now because of all the semi-truck traffic and other traffic we have cutting through from the industrial park. So that's gotten cut off. I don't know if the expansion, nobody's really talked to us about what's going to happen on 200 West. I've heard from the county, who's not really involved, that there may be sidewalks, there may be lane widening, turn lanes, et cetera. But nobody's come to talk to us. We've gotten most of that information either on our own or by going and talking to the people that were doing the surveys, the workers that were out there and trying to pick their brains. So again, I don't think this is what LEAP intended when they were talking about residential. I also don't think that the entrances really address the issue of the sight lines and the berms, especially that truck entrance that is across from houses down there. All of those houses, you know how late it gets or how early it gets dark, especially in the winter. All those houses are going to have any vehicles leaving those sites right across their fronts of their houses, all the lights from those vehicles. The Lewises to the north, which are right across from the main entrance, it looks staggered, but their house is actually sitting in between that drive and the next drive. So all of that traffic is going to pass through there. And in the evenings, think about 1,000 or 2,000 headlights crossing across the front of your house, in the evening. So we'll see how that goes. Ideally, the thoughts about, staggered berming or something, that sounds better. Talk about this berming. The pictures you showed didn't show the 8-foot security fence with hooks pointing outward that's described in your fencing plan. That goes between the sidewalk or between the road and the berm. You just showed a nice pretty berm and trees, but there's actually a security fence. And I applaud you. You got biologics, gases, whatever. It needs to be a secure site. But what's that fencing going to look like? Is that a solid fencing? Or what is that? So is there essentially a wall on the other side and trees and berms? And that's what everybody's going to look at. Lighting and signage, road lighting, signage coming in and out. Concerned about that? Yes, you can have it pointed down. Take a look at what's happening at your site. If you get a chance after tonight's meeting, go look at the construction security lighting, et cetera, that's up there tonight. I've got a post on Facebook. Some people have shown pictures. We can see it from our house, miles away. We can see that it's all lit up out there. We can see how lit up that construction site is all the way from our house. Water runoff. Appreciate that you're going to try to contain any contamination, but we're all on wells. So how much water are you actually diverting from our ground system as soon as you contain it? I don't want it to drain into my well. You know, I'm not sure how my well is fed, but if you're going to block that much surface right across the road, most of our wells are in the front of our houses, how much does that impact our wells? Quality, but also quantity. Noise and dust, it's still a problem on the north side. It's going to be just as bad on this side.
We're at 6 minutes, just so you know.
Like I said, there's a whole lot going on. The other thing I want to ask about noise and dust, people are complaining about their HVAC systems on the north side. So I don't know if you guys have checked into that. They're changing out filters. It's getting covered. They're actually also breathing all that dust day long, day in, day out. That's on the construction side. 40% coverage, I think, is mentioned as a minimum. Does that include your solar panels? So the PV? Does that include your outside storage units, the parking lots, as well as the buildings? And if you've got lined ponds, does that include lined ponds, et cetera? So is that 40% blockage of what's going to actually happen within the ground? Questions. Again, that gets back into water and other questions we have. So lots and lots of other questions. My understanding is you guys have been as forthcoming as you can be and have been really tried to work with some of the residents. Flora, my understanding is some of the residents up north, as much as they hate the situation they're in, Flora has helped make it better. So kind of like Glenn said, you know, help us out if you're going to be good neighbors. Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, Laura Newman, 195 North, 200 West. So we're basically right across from that big giant building. I noticed my husband did a great job of explaining a lot of questions that I already had, and so did my other neighbor down there. Anyway, my one question is, you seemed very concerned about, oh, you set back over at 32 where you were 100 feet more than what they said that you should be. You said, oh, it's 300, but we would set back to 400, so that's an extra 100 feet. But then on 32, I know because of the tall buildings, you had to set back. So in essence, you said that you were supposed to set back for 485 feet. So you only added 7 more feet. You know, we're residents all along there, and I've got this big tall building. It's looking right into my house. All those people can, you know, still that far. I mean, all our windows on the front, it's all going to be affected, all that lighting. We see it from the back side of our house too. They say they're lighting in the industrial park. It comes right into my window. I know you guys are supposed to do the low lighting, but as tall as those buildings are going to be, we're still going to be affected. So that's, you know, a concern. And, you know, I just wish that maybe, you know, you could think about that a little bit more. If you're taking it back an extra 100 feet on 32 where there's not a residence right there, why can't you take it back further off of 200 where there are residents on the other side? Concerned about that. Yes, I'm concerned about traffic. My whole life is going to change. I'm going from country back to a city life that I just left. I moved out there to help my in-laws, and now we're going to have to figure out something for them. So, but I do appreciate some of those concerns you had. I am concerned about the berms. I'm going to lose, I don't know how many hours now of my sunlight because of the building and because of the berms and their height. So I enjoy my sunsets. I grew up on a dairy farm. This is going to be really hard for me again, but I appreciate the things that you are trying to do. And I know Lily's a good company, but yeah, if you want to buy us out, that would be wonderful, because this is not the life we wanted. So.
Thank you.
I'm Jeff Obenchain, 21 North, 200 West. I'm the southernmost home to the property itself that you guys are building upon, or you're building upon. The truck entrance is my driveway, basically. So when I pull out of my driveway, I'm going to have to go, there'll be trucks parked down the left side. I have a relatively large RV. I have a boat. If I want to pull out of my driveway with this double lane, right now I'm taking up the entire lane, just get out of my driveway the way it is. You're going to put a berm out there in the middle of this thing. I don't think I can get in my driveway. You're going to build all this, make drugs and chemicals, whatever. I assume there'll be some sort of exhaust out of this from whatever chemicals you're putting into the air. I don't know what it is. Is it a health hazard to my family? All the dirt and the dust. We just got a new AC unit last year. Is that going to shorten the life of that? I'm like Glenn. I also have a swimming pool in my backyard that we won't be able to use because everybody's going to drive by. You're just going to see us in our backyard. We're just concerned that it's going to change our quality of life. We moved to the country for a reason. It's no longer going to be country. I guess that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Good evening. My name's Aaron Smith. I reside on Countryside Drive in Lebanon. I would appreciate hearing some comments about some specific plans for air pollution control.
Thank you, Aaron. Additional public comment? Seeing no additional public comment, I will go ahead and close the public hearing portion of the meeting. And Ben, do you have any follow-up comments?
Yeah, maybe just a few, and maybe I'll defer first of all to Kevin on the improvements to 200 West that are being proposed. It's actually not part of the Lilly project. It's actually an IEDC project, but I think there was a misunderstanding that 200 West was going to be a divided boulevard, and it's not. It's more of just they're going to beef up the 2-lane road and then add turn lanes. So maybe if you want to kind of touch on that a little bit, Kevin.
I'm sorry if I gave anyone the impression that 200 West would be a divided 4-lane road. It is going to be reconstructed across the entire frontage of the Lilly property. Full depth asphalt reconstruction. The center line is primarily moving west, so as not to impact any of the driveways on the east side of the road. The pavement will be widened. I'm going from memory, so I may be off a little bit, but I believe it's an 11-foot lane in each direction, plus a 6-foot asphalt shoulder. So pretty substantial reconstruction. There will also be turn lanes provided for all the turning maneuvers into Lilly, as well as an additional turn lanes as you go into 2, which will be modified with the proposed roundabout that's supposed to be on. As you go south of the Lilly frontage, the road will be resurfaced and there will be deep patching. And then as you get towards Mount Zion Road, what we are proposing is that the road will be realigned west to square up the intersection of Mount Zion and 200 West. Difficulties you see with large trucks and other equipment turning there and hitting the bridge. These are all improvements that would be made not by Lilly, but by the state, by the IEDC, and through their representatives at Pure Development.
There are pedestrian amenities on that section of 202, correct?
They are planning to build I think it's a 10-foot asphalt path along the west side of.
That would run basically to the southern border of Eli Lilly, correct, for now?
Yeah, to the southern border of Eli Lilly. At some point, that project would probably be extended further south when there is another project, there's still a substantial amount of Leap District property further south.
You need to come up to the
The,
microphone.
the public hearing portion's
Yeah.
closed, but
Yeah, so,
Ben-
and what he said is the widening will go west. It will not go east. So basically the edge of pavement on the east side will stay in the same location.
South of the Lilly project.
South of the Lilly project, there will be no widening. It will just be a reconstruction, a resurfacing of the pavement. And yes, along the Lilly project, they will hold the eastern edge of pavement and reconstruct everything to the west, widening to the west, adding the path to the west.
The intention would be that 200 West would be further improved south as additional projects go south. So right now they're just looking at improving along the Eli Lilly property boundary, but obviously there clearly will need to be improvements further south down to Mount Zion Road at such time that they're warranted as projects go south.
But the realignment of Mount Zion, of 200 West at Mount Zion Road is comment that we've made from an engineering standpoint. The county has also made similar comments. So we're not seeing, but from what the interactions we've had with the IEDC and their representatives, that we expect them to comply with that request.
That was the primary element. Because I know there's a couple comments about medians. I wanted to make sure that was cleared up. There will not be any restricted access on 200 West. It's just a beefed up 2-lane road along the Lilly frontage. Outside of that, if there are any specific things that the commission heard.
Yeah, I've got a couple for you. First of which being the highest window in the renderings on any of the buildings, as I recall, it was not on the 87-foot building or the 117-foot building. The highest windows, which you can see out of, would be
Yeah, so
in that admin
if they want to
area.
pull the screen back up, this is the view of the closest building to 200 West. You'll see there aren't windows on that eastern side. You've got a couple of service doors down at the ground level, but there aren't any windows as you go higher up in the building. The gray part you see right in the middle here is one of the stairwells. As you can see, you can kind of get a peek of some windows on the north side of that, but those wouldn't face east. And so certainly on the buildings closest to 200 West, there wouldn't be any windows on the higher elevations of the building.
So that's not, but the reason I bring that up,
Yes.
that's not to say it's private, but there's not windows all the way up there, I guess would be the
Yeah.
point to that piece. Another comment that was brought up was semis stopping on the road. So yes, we do have that issue in the current industrial park. It's working on being addressed within the industrial park. It's less of an issue because it's fully industrial, still an issue. But here, I believe it is the access point. They're not going to be restricted coming in, so they will be allowed in and parking on Lilly facility. They are not going to want these semis sitting outside of their secured facility. So we should not be in a position where there's semis outside, correct?
Yeah, and kind of if they want to pull this back up, you can kind of see it again. There is a lengthy right turn lane at the primary northern entrance here to try to, again, if there is potentially any queuing that's off the side, it would be in the turn lane. Kevin, I don't know if you know, this isn't showing necessarily a turn lane, but again, this is the road improvements is not a Lilly project, so they may not be accurately showing what's.
That's a question that we've asked we've issued comments related to that, understanding the volume of truck traffic that is to be expected and looking at those traffic impacts. And we want it to be proven to us that there's not a need for additional turn lanes there due to staging.
And maybe just to go back to your question, Corey, no, we would not permit trucks to park on 200 West. So if that ever becomes an issue, we would enforce no parking on 200 West.
Right. And that's even more relevant in this case because of the proximity to residential.
Absolutely.
I get it's still a problem in the business park. I'm not condoning that,
Yeah.
but it's less there.
And I would say again, maybe really address it. We have some heavy logistics users in the business park that have significant truck traffic coming and going. One of the biggest ones actually was US Cold, and some of their recent improvements, we actually required them to improve their queuing on site so that they wouldn't do that anymore. And again, it's not to say we've fixed every one of them, but that's again something, making sure there's plenty of queuing on sites that doesn't happen. Again, this is not a heavy logistics site necessarily, so there won't be seeing that kind of volume. But yeah, we certainly would want to make sure, as Kevin said, if we get those traffic counts to make sure there's plenty of queuing so that doesn't happen.
And then the last piece that we heard a couple of times was around air quality. So I don't know if we can speak to, I mean, obviously everyone under the sun is involved in that, from IDEM to EPA to.
And that's what I would just say generally, is there are restrictions on air emissions from IDEM and EPA. I don't know if they have any specific hazardous emissions, but they do have to remain under those levels as provided by IDEM and EPA. But maybe they might be able to address that a little more specifically.
Yeah. So happy to address kind of at a high level both air emissions, but I think some of the other points as well, just to clarify from some of the other comments from the town here. So absolutely, from an air quality perspective, I mean, pharmaceuticals as compared to other heavy industry is one of the most highest regulated. So for sure, right, it'll be compliant with everything from an EPA perspective and everything that would regulate air emissions. Furthermore, most of and near all of our processes are liquid or solvent based. So they're not designed in such a way that would generate a lot of external emissions outside of just what occur within the process. But all those would have the requisite filtration, scrubbing technologies, et cetera. So just as we would treat any other waste from the site, it would be compliant with anything and above expectation for minimum baseline. From an air quality perspective. So the other thing kind of mentioned before, just to highlight, yeah, indeed, this site, as I mentioned, is focused on small batch clinical trial manufacture. So this is not a site that once we're running at steady state will be a high truck volume or high heavy logistics perspective. It'll be more of just kind of inbound, but really a lot of what we have and with the warehousing capability we've designed in it, it will be maintained on the facility. So it's not a lot where it requires a lot of in-process movement and heavy movement of materials and on and off the facility. So I think that was most of the other ones. But I think the other reality here too is, this is the first time, but this is not intended by any means to be, the only time that we'll be speaking to this. And much like we've been, doing with the other facilities and having community outreach program, as we continue to learn more ourselves, that's absolutely our plan, is to be able to work with the community to understand exactly what's going on when things are occurring. And we're already beginning with that structure and what that plan is going to look like. So not only from what that'll be for residents who are, currently along 200 in the area, but then furthermore to the broader Lebanon community, just as we've already started community outreach programs through LP1, LP2, the Medicine Foundry will join that as well. So that is absolutely our intent to be the best neighbors we can be.
Could you speak to, so the Foundry is to develop new medicines or new products that would go into medicines prior to clinical trial. How would this facility then partner with your other facilities or other manufacturers? And would there be, logistic connections to those facilities? And can you just talk about that?
Yeah. I mean, so some of this is a little bit of a crystal ball exercise into the future of how things might play out. But absolutely, right. The intention is that coming out of these, if they're successful, there would be commercializing activities when we move to another site. But the way in which processes work within the pharmaceutical industry, those would be two distinct facilities. So once the clinical trial program is completed, that's when our aspect of that would be through. The only time where you might see that is if there's any sort of forward processing of the material we have that might be used in a downstream location. But in those cases, it may, in some percentage, be something that would be perhaps at another, at the other facility at LP1. But higher probability, again, because it has to be formulated into an actual drug product, that would be at another facility, which isn't any of the ones that are within the Lebanon district as we've designed it today. So this would go to another logistics distribution hub and then be moved out from there.
Any other questions or clarifications from the commission for Ben? Thank you very much again.
I would like to say, I mean, is there, for all your neighbors around, I mean, if there's other, besides the community involvement, I mean, they're the main community you're going to affect right across the street. Do you have a way for them just here at the public meeting, just to let them know the best way to contact you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think kind of following up to it, we do have within that, we've got a community relations individual here who's actually with us. So if there's anybody who would, and it's interested in the community, we'll hang out so we can make sure to have that information exchanged.
Thank you.
Yep.
Good deal. All right. So any last moment questions from the commission? Seeing none, so we are obviously considering docket 25-5. So would there be any motions in reference to this item?
Asking for
A motion, yep.
I'll make a motion that we approve the development plan for docket 25-5, contingent on the following conditions: TAC comments, the applicant adequately address any remaining City of Lebanon Technical Advisory Committee comments, stormwater approval, lighting plan, and signage plan.
So we do have a motion to approve.
I'll second it.
We've got a motion and a second. All those in favor, please signify with an aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. That motion does carry. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for participating this evening as well on all sides. Ben, do you have additional?
Yeah, and I would just say, in addition, I mean, Lily will stick around for some contact information. If anybody has any follow-up questions from staff, clearly we're still completing the technical aspect of the review of the construction plan. So there may be some small changes here and there. But if anybody has any follow-up questions for planning or engineering staff, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy to respond to emails at any time. If there are any follow-up questions that we didn't quite answer, we can certainly give you more information as needed.
Could you give me your phone number on the office?
Yeah, if anybody wants one of my cards, I know some of you do have my contact information, but if anybody wants a card, I'd be happy to get it for you before you leave today as well.
Ben's really hard to find.
I will say the easiest way to get a hold of me is email. I'm terrible at responding to landline phone calls, so email is the easiest way, but I'll give everybody a card that wants one.
Very cool.
I would encourage everyone, me and Ben sit across the hall, and I didn't get any calls about the project with questions or concerns. I don't think you did either.
I had one email and responded to it.
So these meetings are great and we appreciate people participating, but you don't have to wait to a meeting to come talk to us and ask us what's going on. We're always happy to sit down with people and flip through an application, talk about things, develop questions that can sometimes and often do turn into changes to a project. So we appreciate everyone coming out and participating in the process, but we're here for you to call on when you want to. So I would encourage you.
Cool. Thank you very much. We have no other business to come before the commission, so I would entertain a motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. Do we have a second? Second. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please signify with an aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. We are adjourned. Thank you very much. We will see you at next month's meeting.